Welcome to A Shot in the Arm podcast. My name is Yvette Raphael, and I am so happy and glad to host my friend and co-host Ben Plumley in Tembisa, Mall of Tembisa, South Africa. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. And yes, I'm Ben Plumley. A Shot in the Arm podcast is a podcast about innovation and equity in global health. And in this podcast, Yvette, you and I are looking at, we've known each other really for 20 years.
Yes,
and how
it's a long 20 years.
Well, yes, we were test tube babies at the time, obviously.
Yes.
But looking at how the response to AIDS, particularly in Africa and particularly on this World AIDS Day, how that has been transformed, or not, as the case may be.
Yes, and how appropriate for your T-shirt as well, Ben. Congratulations, it's very pretty.
Thank you, and a shout out to Posy for the T-shirt. So first up, Yvette, you and I met 20 years ago. I report it and describe it in Business Fights AIDS podcast. We were at a peer training session in Cape Town, and I was there with Ambassador Richard Holbrooke. And you basically gave Richard Holbrooke a tough time. Do you remember that?
Yes, definitely. I think my whole advocacy is around disruption. It's around making sure people really think about what they do, because this disease, this World AIDS Day events are really not just talk shops. It really should be something that we commit to make real change. And yes, I gave him a hard time, but look where we are. Yesterday we were at Mamelodi looking at one of the peer education models. Long live those models, and just seeing how successful that was.
Yeah. And that was an MTV Staying Alive peer education session for these incredible young kids, young teenagers who, it's always a pleasure to be with them. It's like a good shot of caffeine. It really is invigorating.
Yes.
So look, the last 20 years, how's it been for you? I mean, it's a bit of a naive question to ask, but this journey of the last 20 years, what are the things that really stand out to you?
For me, what stands out is how far we've come in HIV research, how far we've come as a people with this disease that looked such doom and gloom, but just look at how people have not only embraced it, but how the research is also changing how people see it, because now we have pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis, we have long-acting drugs, we have long-acting injectable HIV prevention. It's just crazy how the research has really, really advanced. And it shows that if we do more, we'll get to a point where we have a vaccine or a cure.
Yeah, you see, you have the optimism that I find it hard to share. So I'll be the yin to your yang here.
Yes.
I mean, for me, we had huge success in the first decade of this century, where through a range of efforts, including very much from yours, we were able to provide antiretroviral therapy at much lower costs, at much wider availability to populations across the developed world and developing world, and particularly here in South Africa. I mean, looking at the WHO and UNAIDS figures, it looks like a good 75% of people living with HIV are now on treatment.
Yes, and that is very, very important for HIV prevention. We all know that. And it just shows that U equals U as a message is going places.
Yeah. And a shout out to the Prevention Access Campaign for the U equals U.
Yeah.
But okay, and here's my other downer. Here's my other Debbie Downer. We thought we were creating at least some progress towards equity in services, equity in innovation. And yet the COVID response showed us that actually we hadn't fundamentally changed the way that drugs, vaccines had been developed. And we had a huge disparity of access in the developing world. vaccine nationalism in the rich countries that really prevented widespread availability of vaccines and drugs. And that has been very sobering to me. So the advances that we made in HIV, they didn't really become institutionalized in the way we deal with public health.
Yes, but it also talks to my point around it, Ben, that COVID, it was a very rich disease. It's the rich auntie's kid, and HIV has always been the poor auntie. But what it also shows is how racist the world still is. And I like the fact that the decolonization discussion is coming up, but it also just shows that COVID exposed white supremacy, racism, and just how the West is still running the world. And I know I had information way, way before, but the West brought out all of this HIV, COVID medication even before it was made. How rude.
Yeah. And so
It's almost like a taxi driver in South Africa, just chipping in front of
yeah,
us.
in the little bockies coming into traffic. So for you, this journey over the last 20 years, I mean, you have moved from being a peer advocate, peer support staff in a company to being a global advocate, an internationally respected leader, and you also have now a very well-known fashion business through Posi. How has this journey been for you?
You talking about the fashion?
All of it.
No, Ben. That my fashion history is like just a realization, and it was brought to me by COVID. While everybody poses a COVID baby, totally, but it's always been a dream of mine that, listen, we need to have a look at how advocates really, really don't have a life after HIV. And when that stopped and everything looked like the world is coming to an end, I had to sit down and I was being myself. I was being creative. I realized that there's stuff that I want to do. I feel good when women dress up nicely. I like to see advocates and activists. This is actually an activist brand, like literally. I mean, like everything, including this one that I'm wearing, which is talking about Prudence passion for HIV, but it is basically it. It is just a brand born out of COVID, but an expression of my own creativity and my love for fashion.
And I guess for me, fashion for you coming out of COVID, for me, it was really the podcasts. Who would have imagined 20 years ago that you and I would be doing this today?
But yeah, it's fun, and I think we really enjoying it, and we're reaching our viewers, listeners, with this very important messages and trying to decolonize you.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a work in progress.
Yes.
So here we are in South Africa. How would you view the South African response over the last 20 years? Because it's a story of huge pain and tribulation, but also a story of great achievement and resilience.
Yes, obviously the South African advocacy sphere, the advocates have done great work to get us where we are. HIV medication is available. HIV treatment is available. People are able to go to the clinic and express what they want. And we are in a better space with the type of drugs that we supply. South Africa is really just following the trends. We don't have many of those ARVs medication that got people worried. I will have big breast, lipodystrophy. Yes, I would have lipodystrophy. We've come a long way. However, we are not at the end yet. Although it's possible that we will see an end to AIDS, but my biggest fear is that we might relax. And this period where the UNAIDS report talks about we are in danger, we are just in danger as a country to get relaxed and not keep this on top of the agenda. We need to make sure we leave no one behind.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raise UNAIDS because The danger report that was released in July indicated that we were not on track to meet the 2030 targets of ending HIV as a public health crisis. But I watched Winnie Biamina's World AIDS Day statement on YouTube, actually, Winnie being the executive director of UNAIDS. And I thought it was very powerful. I think it was a very clear call to action, particularly around the drivers of HIV and particularly things like gender-based violence. So I really appreciated
and the
that.
Structural reasons of why HIV is still thriving. And for me, that is poverty. And once we can do better at eliminating poverty, then we will see young people taking control of their lives. And actually, Ben, that is why Posi. It's because I want to leave a legacy where we understand health is wealth and wealth is health. If you are able to provide food for yourself, you're not in a vulnerable position as a young person. And for me, if we can have 20 branches of Posi across the country where young people like Mbalenhle work and provide for themselves and not depend on somebody to give them their bread on the table, I would be so happy.
And that's a global call to action, I guess, as well. Now, Yvette, there was one other thing I wanted to ask you. In America, we call it the fall, but in the United Kingdom and I guess in South Africa, we call it autumn.
Mm-hmm.
But the English writer, Kate Moss, started a campaign to highlight women leaders from all ranges of society, from all walks of life, who had an impact in the world. All too often, we think of the main drivers in history being men, with the occasional extraordinary woman coming into the picture, but that's not true. And so I wanted to borrow Kate's campaign just for us right here now. And if you were to look at the AIDS response, who is there, a woman leader, alive or dead, that has really inspired and really transformed the response, do you think?
Prudence Nobantu Mabele, my best friend, my great friend. She has passed on. May her soul rest in peace. Prudence was ahead of her times. As you can read on the t-shirt, she used to take on power. She used to take on whiteness. She used to take on men. And she was just way ahead of the time. And we are in the response for HIV prevention for young girls and women because of Prudence. We look at the Depo-Provera ring. Prudence was at the heart, Ben, of making sure the idea of women in KZN to have an HIV prevention method that is controlled by women. And the agenda for HIV prevention, today we have the ring, and we come from the microbicide world, we come from the gel world, something that she actually led. So for me, it will always be Prudence Mabele, the disruptor. She did not care where we are, but Prudence resonated with indigenous people across the world. And I think that is the one thing we miss about Prue.
Yeah, we do very much miss Prudence.
She's the first woman to publicly disclose in South Africa that she had HIV. So we must not forget. And because of what she did, women like myself were able to, disclose our status without fear.
Well, for me, the unsung women leader in the AIDS response is Julia Cleaves, the late Julia Cleaves, who was a British writer, development professional, and who worked at UNAIDS. In fact, she preceded me as Peter's chief of staff. And what I loved about Julia was a really, how shall I put this, brutal honesty. She could strike terror into the heart of pharmaceutical executives. But she also had an incredible passion and humanity. And as we were navigating the strange waters of UNAIDS, she really had her heart and her mind and her soul for her fellow colleagues. And she had a huge impact on me. Not least, I think she was also ahead of her time in fighting the decolonialization or fighting to the colonialization agenda in HIV. And that's one thing I wanted us to talk about. We did a podcast at the International AIDS Conference in 2022 in Montreal, and we talked about the localization, decolonialization agenda, which is about bringing power and authority to communities and countries most affected, rather than teleporting or transporting expertise from the West, from the North, into the response. So since July, how much I mean, it's going to be a long-term process, but how much have we started to change the conversation, do you think?
I think the only way we can change that is if we really are intentional in making a change into the decolonization measure. Vuiseka Dubula, who's my friend, says it so carefully: minimum standards for funders, minimum standards for international organization, to say this is what you can and cannot do. I don't think you bring expertise, Ben. I just think you bring your own stuff. Expertise are here. I just think whiteness and the North bring their own views, their own agendas into Africa, and very seldom is it the same as ours. I think where we're getting with the decolonization discussion right now is we are digging into what makes us do those things, right? And if we can get finances and money and power to Africa, for us to make our own decisions, we would work well together with you.
Yeah. And I think there is a responsibility on us in the North to check ourselves constantly, to look at the values, the prejudices that we bring consciously or unconsciously. Actually, more accurately, I think it's unconscious biases now, and how we unpack that. I mean, to my mind, no one is safe until everyone is safe. That's the mantra that has really driven me through COVID. And so it's not a conversation now that has to be between donor and beneficiary. I can't stand that word, beneficiary. But yes, we're all in it together. We're all partners. And I think one of the things that I've really learned over the years is that the lessons from the communities that you work in, from here in Midrand, South Africa, are as relevant in the North, in communities in the North, as anything else, as perhaps the antiretrovirals coming from New Jersey down to Cape Town.
Yeah.
So look, one other question. Prevention. We haven't really seen a major reduction in new infections year on year. I mean, the UN and WHO have pointed to some success, and there's been a slight decline in the curves, but we really haven't broken the back. Why do you think that is?
We have not done that, Ben, because we are not able to get an HIV prevention method that suits young people. And currently young people are saying, give us the ring. But are we listening? Do we understand? Or do we continuously bring our own prejudice and our own views to it? Yes, big news. Kebele was approved in South Africa yesterday, and we are happy and we're excited that SAPRA made that move. However, when we do not have a box of options for women, we cannot even start to think we can make a dent, especially for young people. Young people have different needs, and we need to make sure that we meet with them where they are at and giving them options for them to make a choice.
Well, that is a very nice setup, Yvette, for the next part of the podcast.
Yes.
Because after the break, we're going to hear your interview with one of your mentorees, Lolo Salisi. Mentees.
Yes.
Lolo Saliso, who is the program officer at APHA. And APHA stands for, again?
Advocates for the Prevention of HIV in Africa. People would like to say AIDS, but it's actually in Africa. And in isiXhosa, because we are in South Africa, it just means we are here. We were 3 young, naive advocates out of an AVAC fellowship. And we said, we're going to be here. We're going to make a change in HIV prevention research and how it is handled. And 5-6 years later, look where we are.
Yeah, look where we are. We're in the Posse store. And if you can hear background noises as we record this podcast, it is because we're in a busy shopping mall.
Yes, and we're about to open in the next few minutes, so bear with us. We are in South Africa, we're in a shopping mall, and we'd really, really like for you to just have a feeling, Ben, out of the quietness. I think sometimes we get so used to our own setup. Enjoy the vibe. It is a vibe. As you can see, the mural behind us, it's a vibe in South Africa. It's a vibe in Tembisa.
In Tembisa. Now, I mean, I think the picture behind us could be misinterpreted if you were looking at this for those of us who are viewing the podcast, but it is in fact of a young girl blowing a large bubble
Out
with
of a
bubble gum.
bubble gum. Yes.
Right. Well, look, after the break, Yvette will be back with Lolo. So, yeah, looking forward to that interview.
Yes. Thank you, and see you after the break, everyone. Alrighty, as promised, we are back from the break, and now we have Loyiso Saliso. Some call her Mini Yvette, but I literally want to give it to Lolo for her individuality, for her own radicalism, and for her own power. Loyiso, welcome to A Shot in the Arm podcast. We are very happy to have you, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Why HIV/AIDS prevention, and why are you an activist, by the way?
Yo, well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good morning from across the world. I'm in South Africa, and it's good to be back in the seat of this podcast. Thank you so much for having me, Yvette. And about me, I am a radical activist. I think that's why people call me Mini Yvette or Mini Mama Winnie Mandela, because I'm unapologetic about fighting for people's human rights. And well, about myself, I started off activism and being an advocate, I think back in 2012, 2013. But technically, I think I've always been an advocate since high school, because I used to get in trouble for speaking up and like asking the hard questions. Why must we go outside? Why must this happen? And I became a headache at school. So I think I've always been an advocate at heart, but really applying it in terms of fighting for human rights was around 2012, 2013. I started in the gender-based violence and femicide field. And currently, right now, I identify as an intersectional advocate, because I understood as I grew and learned in this space that all our struggles actually intersect, and we can't fight for GBVF without fighting for HIV prevention and AIDS and so forth. So, yeah, that's my journey in a nutshell.
All right, Lola. So, with HIV/AIDS prevention advocacy, you started off as a ground force at APA. Do you want to share a little bit about that journey? There's a method to this. I want to get to where we actually want to go, which is young people's leadership. But tell me, just give us a brief about your journey as a ground force.
Okay, so my becoming a ground force, I met Yvette on Facebook. She always says, when I picked you up on Facebook, and she found me on Facebook advocating on social media, and she reached out and said, I really like you. You're quite feisty and fierce. And then later on, I came to Johannesburg to start the Total Shutdown, the movement, the March Against GBV. So from there, I joined APA. I became an APA ground force. My heart is in the community. I think every activist and advocate's heart is in the community. So doing so much community work, that's where I really broadened my skills and got more tools on how to advocate and how to even engage community. But also being an APA ground force opened up so many doors for me. One thing about APA is that, and the program that they have for mentorship, is that they allow young people to go into rooms and spaces, and go and advocate in those spaces and network and meet people and learn from those who came before us how these things are done. And so, from there, I became a proper APA advocate, and we moved, I think for 2 years or 3 years, I was an APA ground force. And then from there, I joined the APA team officially and became an APA administrator, but also still doing community work around APA. And currently I'm sitting as an APA projects officer and still also the coordinator of the ground forces cohort.
And if that is not growth, I don't know what else
I forgot one more thing though. So there's POSI and there's fem entrepreneur, which is feminist entrepreneurship. And so this being my mentor, she started posting during lockdown and we were not discussing this at all. And I went on and I started this brand, which is called Unapologetic Wear, an advocacy, line. And so I'm really learning more than just advocating, but also how do we self-sustain as advocates? How do we also ensure that our work and our words actually is advocated in what we're wearing?
Yes, and I totally love the fact that you take snippets of very powerful advocates and you put it on a t-shirt and I can wear it. Lolo, I want to challenge you right now and tell us about what young people can do to actually take this fight forward. Because as you know, me and Mama Lillian say, there's nothing you can inherit from us.
Yes.
We don't have no baton to give over. And some people say this is cruel. But what do you think activists, young female women's advocates and activists can do to take this forward without expecting an inheritance of something to take forward?
I think saying that there is no inheritance, I would love to differ with that because I think historically we've always inherited something, be it from slavery up until now. We've always inherited something from people who fought before us and who came before us. And I think that inheritance is inheriting the best practices from previous times. It's inheriting, your wisdom and the work that you've done, looking at that, analyzing that, and listening to the tips that you give us and the ideas that you give us. But I think right now with young advocates and those who came before us, it's really important for us. There's a huge gap. And I feel it's very important that right now we find ways and means in which we can actually, bring that gap and close that gap off between the young and the old. It's very important right now. Coming from COVID-19, I think we have a lot to do, a lot of work to do in terms of going back to the drawing board and re-strategizing how do we advocate moving forward, because some things are no longer working right now. And so I really feel that young people need to listen to the older people, to the older advocates, hear how they're doing things, take that wisdom.
But you guys actually listen, Lolo. I want to cut you off there. You guys know it all. And we are just so looking forward to listening to you.
Yes, but here's the thing. I want us to listen to your wisdom and listen to your experiences because we come on, I'm no longer young as well, but young people, young advocates come with more fire, with more innovative ideas, with more eagerness, and that more energy. And so if we can put those things together, we could create something. And for everything that we fight for, unity is the most important thing. And I think the unity between the older advocates and the young advocates is very important. We need to bridge that gap one way or the other.
Yes, and that can only happen if we continuously have these conversations,
Yes.
but also not just conversations. And I'm passionate about mentorship. And you always say to me, but Auntie, you can't solve. She calls me Auntie when nobody's watching. But
Okay.
Auntie, you can't solve the world's problems. But it's important that when we say we mentor young people, we know it's not a once-off. It's something that you continuously have to be there. And for me, it is also, you say you're not that young anymore, but for me, you're a younger person because there is, so I'm expecting you also to start mentoring young people. And the ground force is one of those things. But how do you integrate? How do you integrate what you've learned from older advocates about mentorship and being there for other women?
So funny enough, this week I posted, I think, a picture of us at the Matrix Consultants with two of the ground forces. And I wrote something at the end of it that, what people don't know is that I'm a mentee who's also a mentor. And this is actually me living what I've manifested of us paying it forward and not just it ending with us. And so I think that with me being the coordinator, for example, of the ground forces, I'm taking what you have taught me. I'm still taking things that you teach me today and applying them with the young people, but also giving them that room. I think it's so important that they have more room and more space to talk, to share, to say, okay, I hear you here, but I think maybe if we do A, B, C, and D, that's how we are also learning from those young people. So it's a learn program from both ends. But for me, I take it from the older, I think I'm caught up in the middle actually. So I take it from the older advocates, take it to the young people. But I think it's important that we actually listen to young people because they have so many good things to say.
Thank you so much, Lolo. And as we wait for my co-host to come back, after the break, we're going to just close everyone out because this is World AIDS Day. Very exciting. And thanks for getting me a gift. It's important that people give gifts to people who have fought this fight in a long time. Thank you in advance. And after the break, we'll be joined by Ben again. Thank you, Loisa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, what a World AIDS Day, Yvette. A really great episode, I think. Really loved the conversation between you and Lolo. Last thoughts as we, celebrate World AIDS Day around the world.
I think for me, Ben, is that we need to see an end to AIDS. We need to see an end to new HIV infections. And I think if we are just committed enough, we will get there. I need our governments, especially my own government, to invest in HIV prevention research, but also to trust the science and to make sure we give young people options so that they can make a choice for their own HIV prevention. And thanks for being in my country, my humble abode, my space, the Kasiko Lab in Mall of Tembisa.
It's been a real pleasure being here. And we apologize, obviously, for disrupting your fellow shop owners. But, that's it for this episode. We hope you have a thoughtful but joyous World AIDS Day. There's a lot for us to do, but a lot we can do. Thanks to Eric Espera, our producer and director from Newsdoc Media. And thanks also to you. Remember, you can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms and on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to give us 5 stars. Well, have a great week and a safe week, everyone.